good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Brand New You Show. I'm Ryan, your host, and today we welcome to the show Todd Lohenry from toddlohenry.com. Todd is a former director of marketing and technology for a major employee wellness brand and former college instructor of content and search engine marketing and social media. His passion is helping thinkers become thought leaders through a process he calls the elevation workflow. The elevation workflow is a lather, rinse, repeat process which Todd follows with his clients to help them become credible thought leaders in their field by making their content searchable, findable, knowable, usable, and shareable. Todd, it seems that you and I have a passion for helping people build their online reputations, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Brand New You Show.
Ryan, thank you very much for having me on the show. I'm a big fan of your work, and like you said, we're both in the business of helping people establish and elevate their brands online, although we come at it from different perspectives, and that's something that I'm really looking forward to exploring with you.
Yeah, it's going to be, I think, an interesting conversation, and quite frankly, one that people need to know more about, especially as our lives, if you will, go online more and more frequently with, everything that we post, every picture, every video, every comment that we make on a blog. And it's just an important topic, and I'm really glad that we were able to hook up and talk about this because you being a thought leader yourself on this topic should make for a very interesting discussion and full of knowledge for the listeners today.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, because whether or not you decide to take Seth Godin's strategy and become a linchpin within your organization, or you take James Altucher's approach and choose yourself, it's absolutely critical that what we do online, we do not by accident, but on purpose. And for some people, there are a lot of different purposes for going out onto the internet. Some people like to, use the internet to post pictures of kittens and bacon and Kim Kardashian, and that's great. But, a lot of us go on the internet because we want to get found precisely for who we are and what Google calls the zero moment of truth. Mm-hmm. When people are looking for us, we want to show up as a solution.
Right. Well, I tell you what, let's take a step back from getting found on Google for a second, and let's talk about what happens when we don't want to get found, which is we're on vacation. And I appreciate the fact that you actually are calling me on during your vacation right now. But I am curious, if you could vacation in only one place for the rest of your vacation days, where would you go?
Oh, my goodness, that's such a tough question because there are a lot of places that I haven't been to, but I think the place where I would like to spend the rest of my vacation days would be Ireland. I've had the opportunity to be there one time, and there's a lot there that I would love to explore.
Okay, great. Now, while you're exploring, or not exploring, I guess, on your holiday, what book are you currently reading, or which book would you take with you?
Well, I always have a couple of different books going at the same time. Something for business, something for leisure, something for personal. Currently, I'm reading two different books. One is by Dr. Rick Hansen called Hardwiring Happiness, which is a great book on how the brain works and how we can focus more on the good things that are happening to us and kind of accentuate the positive and eliminate the negative kind of thing. And then the book that I'm reading for pleasure right now, usually the theme is something around leadership. And currently I'm reading a book called American Lion about Andrew Jackson. I like reading historical biographies about, people that have impacted our past.
I once had a goal. I probably still do. It's in the back of my mind. And I started it, but got distracted by a bunch of other business books. But my goal was to read one biography of every president. So I'm not doing very well on that goal. The last one I think I read was 2 years ago.
Well, I'm inspired a lot by the thinking around the American Revolution and the people that played a role. And while Andrew Jackson is not necessarily in that same era, still, there's a lot that we can learn, from people that have been in a leadership role around critical events like that.
Right, right. So while we're talking about leadership roles, let's go ahead and transition now from our vacation mode to that Google zero moment of truth, if you will. And I'm curious, what is your opinion of what makes a good online reputation?
Well, to me, a good online reputation comes from the simple act of finding and sharing great information in such a way that you get found. So that's a very simple way. As a matter of fact, some people have said that's an oversimplified definition of thought leadership, but I take a very inclusive approach to that. When I say find, finding might be walking along the beach while you're on vacation and having that rare moment of insight that you document and share with people online. But it could also be, curating content, from someone's blog. Like last week, you wrote a great post about becoming the Google of your niche. And I'm writing a blog post that's going to incorporate some of your thinking, in that process. So when you say find, it can be, you can create something, but you can also curate something. The point is that whatever you're doing it on purpose. So you have to start by thinking about who you are and what are the 3, 4, 5 things that you want people to remember when they've left your site or heard your podcast or whatever. To me, that's a very simple definition of branding, but it's being intentional about the keywords with which you want to be associated,
right,
and then putting that information online in a way that it can get found.
Okay. Now, you mentioned something in your answer there. You used the phrase thought leader, and that phrase gets batted around a lot. Depending upon who you talk to, you get different definitions. So I'm curious, what is a thought leader to you?
Yeah, it's one of those things, a lot of people, I find it even has a negative connotation, and I don't get that, because I haven't found, a better way to describe it. I think it is it's an abused word. I think a lot of people claim it for themselves when they don't really deserve it. But to me, a thought leader, because a lot of my focus is on search, a thought leader is someone who shows up as having done the work around a particular topic, and other people are recognizing that. They might be quoting that person, they might be curating their content, they might be referring or deferring to them. But when you've taken the time to document your work, put it online, and a community starts to gather around it, I think at that point you're starting to achieve thought leadership status.
Okay. Now, I mentioned in the intro that you're passionate about helping a thinker become a thought leader. What is the difference between a thinker and a thought leader?
Well, I think it's really a very simple distinction, and that is that both the thinker and the thought leader have a point of view, and it's probably a pretty well-developed point of view. But the thinker is limited to word of mouth and the people that are around him or her, and so they may be recognized as the expert in their town or in their community or even in their region. But the thought leader takes it one step further, and they take advantage of the good, fast, and cheap publishing tools that we have at our disposal, and they create a point of view that is, as you said in your introduction, searchable, findable, knowable, memorable, and shareable. And because of all those ibbles, they may become credible online. They may show up in search. They may build an online community. So in a lot of cases, what I find, Ryan, is that the difference between a thinker and a thought leader is simply some internet plumbing. And by that, I mean, it may just be, sitting down with someone deciding what tools, what skills do they have at their disposal, what tools do they have at their disposal, and what makes a difference, or what they can use to make a difference. And so I think that when it comes down to a thinker becoming a thought leader, they need to consider 4 keys, and that is the thoughts, the tools, the tactics, and the timing.
Okay.
And when you put all those 4 things together, then someone can take what it is that they're already thinking and create a thought leadership position on the internet.
Okay. It's interesting what you said there about the thinkers being, local or regional. It's very comparable to what I talked to Dory Clark about when I had her on as a guest, and we were talking about her new book, Standout, where she said there's 3 types of relationships that people build as they're going through their thought leadership journey, if you will. And one is the one-to-one communication. Then there's the one-to-many communication, which is where you start to build an audience via your blog. And then there's ultimately the many-to-many, which is basically where your thoughts kind of take on a life of their own and people begin to talk to them outside of you leading those discussions. And so if I were to correlate your answer to Dory's, it sounds like thinkers are the people who do the one-to-one discussions and potentially just a little bit of that one-to-many, but thought leaders start to turn that corner somewhere. You start to turn the corner between a thinker and a thought leader somewhere in that one-to-many, and then when you definitely get to the many-to-many, you've become the thought leader.
I couldn't have put that better myself. Dory Clark is a person that I admire greatly, and she's doing a phenomenal job of, she is one of the few people, I think, in our marketplace right now that is carrying the standard for thought leadership in a very positive way. And I highly recommend both of her books to anyone, that I work with. And in fact, when you make this connection, Ryan, you might find it interesting to know that originally, I read people like Dory Clark or Seth Godin, and back in 2009, I read Godin's book, Tribes, and I found that, a lot of it was strategy without telling people, now, here are the tools that you should use. You should have a WordPress website, you should use Facebook, you should use Twitter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so in a lot of ways, my workflow started out as kind of a missing manual to these strategy, the strategic thinkers who say, yes, thought leadership is a desirable goal. Here's the strategy for how you get there, but then leave out the part about the mechanics or the plumbing. So that's where, my work comes in. Whatever strategic thinker someone has read around thought leadership, I can help them put that into practice.
Okay, speaking of putting it into practice, let's go ahead and move into a discussion about your elevation workflow process. Now, it is a 9-step process. I'm going to read through each of them just quickly, and then we'll actually have a little discussion about each one. It starts with contemplate, consume, curate, create, collect. Then we connect, converse, convert, and create a community. So if we were to start, if I were to hire me, if I were to hire you to help me go from being a thinker to a thought leader, we would start at contemplate. So can you explain a little bit when you say contemplate, what does that mean?
Okay. Well, first of all, I don't know if you really appreciate how difficult it was to come up with 9 words that all begin with C. Originally the word contemplate was cogitate, and that just didn't work.
That's a hard word to say.
But when it comes to contemplating, okay, my background is actually as a foreign language instructor, and so a lot of my analogies, come down to things around culture and language. So let's say I was, preparing a trip, to a foreign country. I would want to know, a little bit about the culture and language. So, for example, I go to my favorite pub in Cologne, Germany, and they don't cater to Americans there. The menu is in German, and if you speak English, the waiters will continue to walk. So you increase your chances of getting what you want exponentially if you read and speak the language. So how does this apply to the thought leadership process? Well, when we're moving out onto the internet, we have a target audience that we want to reach. It helps us if we understand the culture and the language in which they are already immersed. So you wouldn't, in the same way you wouldn't speak German to, in Paris, okay?
Right.
In the same way you wouldn't go and try to reach a certain target audience and use a different culture or a different language to try to reach them. You have to contemplate who your target audience is and meet them where they are.
Okay. And then, so let's assume that we've done that. I assume in contemplation, we're also identifying some targeted keywords that we would start to look for, or does that come at a later step?
No, absolutely. Because again, I borrow heavily from people like Stephen Covey and David Allen in this process, and so Covey would be the first to say, begin with the end in mind, and so. This is the place where we're already identifying keywords, and we're using tools from Google like the Google AdWords Keyword Planner or Google Trends to find, what keywords are actually resonating with people. So the classic example that I give is, let's say I want to get out of marketing and enter into a more honorable profession. I'm going to start selling used cars.
Okay.
Okay, but because I'm such a classy guy, I am going to call myself a purveyor of fine, previously owned automobiles. The problem is that people are looking for used cars. And so you have to be in strategic alignment with the language that people are already using. And identifying your keywords at this point is absolutely critical, because it will guide everything that you do, from this point forward. So you might not like calling yourself a used car salesman, but if you call yourself something else, you run the risk of not getting found by people who are looking for you.
Okay, so language plays a pretty important role in the process of being found in search then. In a lot of ways, and this is just my background, for a while I felt some imposter syndrome around the idea of calling myself an SEO or a search engine marketer until I started to realize that, that SEO, a lot of it is understanding the culture and language of Google. So when you do things in the way that Google expects, you can anticipate getting found. If you follow the guidelines that Google gives you in their culture and use the tools and the words that they give you, you increase exponentially your chance of getting found. So in a lot of ways, to me, it's all about culture and language. And it's getting found on the internet or being recognized as a thought leader. A lot of it comes down to understanding the culture of Google and being able to speak fluent Google. One of the classic questions as a blogger is, do you write for Google or do you write for your audience? Right. And the answer, of course, is yes. You've got to be able to do both if you want to get found. Yeah, you should always write for your audience with Google in mind, that's for sure.
Exactly.
So let's assume that we've done our contemplation. We've identified the audience we connect with. We've identified some keywords that are important. We know the language they speak. The next step in our elevation workflow is then to consume. So my natural question is, consume what?
Consume what, right. So, in the same way, a couple of years ago, a guy named Clay Johnson wrote an incredible book called The Information Diet. And in that book, he uses, a food metaphor to, get us to think about conscious consumption of what it is that we need to read, for business or, or personal use. A couple of years ago, Eric Schmidt said that from the dawn of time until 2003, man created 5 petabytes of information. We now create that volume every 2 days. So there is a wealth of great information. In order to get found, though, I think we need to get focused around those keywords. So let's say my keywords are marketing, sales, technology, and SEO and productivity. What I want to do is I want to start consuming the world's best information on only the topics that relate to my brand. And I want to find the best websites, the best experts, the best keyword searches, and then, some of the stuff that I might use, someday along the way. And I want to put those all together in one place, create a virtual newspaper or virtual news magazine for myself, and use that to fuel my content marketing.
Okay. All right. And I assume then the next C, curate, is a big part of your content marketing, correct?
Sure. I think that, like King Solomon said, there's nothing new under the sun. We can certainly synthesize new ideas, but you get a lot of credit, or I think you can get a lot of credit for effective curation. Just because I quote you in a blog post, I don't think that detracts from anything. In fact, when I quote someone effectively and bring together a couple of different sources, I think everyone wins in the curation process. The original author gets exposure to my audience. They get a reference link back to their content. I win. My readers win. The key is to do curation under fair use guidelines. And one of the critical things, about fair use guidelines is that you have to add transformative value. You want to add something. And if you quote something in a blog post, the quote should be no more than 20 to 30% of the total post so that Google recognizes your thinking as being original. But, let's take that back, even to a more basic level. I think that for people who are getting started in thought leadership, it's much less daunting to think about sharing an article in Twitter than it is to writing your first 300 to 400 word blog posts. And so curation is a place where people can start to dip their toe in the water and see what resonates with their target audience and whether or not, they're getting, feedback, or they may discover something else along the way. They may discover that, as I did, I broke my own rules. I used to talk about tools and tactics for thought leadership. And what I found instead was that 40 times more people are searching for the word reputation than for thought leadership. And so I can take people in the thought leadership direction, but what I find is that the word reputation resonates more.
Yeah.
And so I need to dial into that language. And I found that in the curation process.
Yeah, and I think that gets back to, thought leadership is kind of one of those cloudy, vague, fuzzy things that people don't really understand well, but they understand reputation. Right.
And I think, again, going back to Covey, that thought leadership is the fruit, but building your reputation is the root. And that's the thing that you have to do first.
Okay. Well, so the next C then is create, and you've kind of already touched on that. And some people say, should you create first? Should you curate first? It sounds like you're an advocate of curating content first, not just to share good content with your audience, but also to learn more yourself and kind of give you that confidence that you need to start creating. Is it okay to create before you curate?
Oh, sure. And if you launch a blog or a website, it's good to have more than one original thought. Maybe 10 or 12 different blog posts that you started to write. But I look at it, and this whole thing about blogging and creating information. When you think about it, a 300 to 400 word blog post is about 60% of one page on in Microsoft Word. And if you can't, say, 60% of a page in Microsoft Word about who you are and what your passion is, maybe the timing isn't right for you.
Right.
So I think another way of saying that, and a more positive way of saying that is, start out with, a couple of original essays about who you are, why you're doing this, and what you hope to accomplish. it's really not that difficult.
Yeah, well, to me too, it makes sense. If you go right out of the gate into your website and you start typing about something that's come to your mind, you may run out of material or information really quickly if you're not consuming and curating other content and continuing to learn yourself.
Right. Well, going back to the consumption stage, if you're using a feed reader or a content reader to continually bring the world's best information to you, you're going to have plenty of ideas to bounce off of. And you'll never run out of original ideas because you can always synthesize new thoughts out of the things that you're reading and then tell people how to apply that. I think that every piece of content that you come across is an opportunity to write what I call a yes, no, maybe so blog post. In other words, you find a good idea and you say, yes, I totally agree. No, I totally disagree, and here's why. Or, maybe, and here's why. Mm-hmm. But you can bounce off of other people's content that you find in the consumption phase and either turn that into curation or creation.
Okay, let's real quick. In the consumption phase, you mentioned RSS readers. Do you have a favorite RSS reader that you use to help you consume content?
Oh, absolutely. I've been a fan of RSS readers for over a decade. I still can't understand why, according to the Pew study on Internet and the American Life, only about 10% of the American Internet population actively is using a tool like this. But like so many other people, I started out with Google Reader. I made the transition to Feedly when Google Reader shut down. I had been using Feedly for many years, kind of side by side with Google Reader.
Yeah, I still use Feedly.
Yeah, and then it's a fantastic tool. But just recently, within the past 3 months, I came across a tool called InnoReader, spelled I-N-O, Reader, I-N-O-R-E-A-D-E-R. And the reason why I like this tool so much is because I said that the information diet needs to consist of sites, searches, sources, and someday maybe information. I could bring all these things together in Feedly with the help of Google Scripts or some outside tools, but all of these things are built into InnoReader, and I'm able to track Facebook pages, Google Plus pages and profiles, Twitter accounts, websites, keyword searches. All the different types of information I need can be brought together in one place. And one of my mantras is never use two tools where one will do. Because what I find is that workflows break down if they're overly complicated. Another thought that guides me, you quote Einstein frequently. Maybe you've heard of Einstein's razor, which is that things must be made as simple as possible, but no simpler. No one in my classes or in my consultancy ever came to me and said, please teach me how to use 60 new tools. Most people are challenged with just handling email effectively.
Right.
So, I am always looking for the single tool that delivers the maximum amount of value. And for me right now, that tool is InnoReader in the consumption space.
Okay. And I also know you can use InnoReader to feed curation type devices like Buffer, which will then take posts from that, put it in Buffer, and then you can put it out into your Twitter feed as well.
Absolutely. So from a mechanical standpoint, at the very lowest end, when I'm reading an article in InnoReader, I've got three different options. I can go on to the next article, I can share it to social media, or I can be so inspired that I want to write a blog post and curate some of that content in there. So as I'm flipping through articles, I'm always thinking, is this shareable? Is it bloggable? And I can go directly from that tool. So you mentioned Buffer. In conjunction with Buffer, I use another great tool called If This Then That.
Yes.
And there is an If This Then That channel for InnoReader. So, for example, I could create a very simple recipe. Every time I mark an article as favorite in InnoReader, it could be dropped into my Twitter buffer and then parsed out over time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so yes, you're correct. You can go very quickly and easily from consuming to publishing in InnoReader with the help of, one or two auxiliary tools.
Right, and I might mention as well on the topic of InnoReader that you have a very good video on YouTube, on your YouTube channel, where you actually go through how to use InnoReader.
Yeah, I hate running or writing documentation, but I love screencasting. So for me, it's much easier.
Yeah.
Just to record a screencast. The tough part is before you sit down to do the screencast, making sure that you don't ramble and, here's another cool feature. But, yeah,
right.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, why use two tools when you can use one, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay, moving on. We've figured out our keywords. We're consuming additional content. Now we're beginning to curate and create content. The next C in the elevation workflow is collect. What does collect mean? Yeah,
so to me, this is, if you think of, I think you said you're showing this, this mind map as we're talking. So everything that's top of the line, I consider to be what Covey calls a private victory. That's the place where you're doing your homework, you're feeding your mind, you're publishing, you're documenting all these different things. So whatever social media tools, that you decide are appropriate for you, whether it's, Pinterest or Twitter or Facebook or whatever, depending on your target audience, you also want to have a place where you collect everything that you're publishing online, and probably a good idea for it to be associated with your name in a really meaningful way. And so what I mean by that is, yeah, it's great to send out 1,000 tweets and to be using Google Plus and Facebook and auto posting and all these different things, but make it easy for people to find you by providing all of your social proof of your expertise in one place. And that could be any one of a number of different tools that you use. One of my favorite tools is a freemium tool, and by the way, every tool that I recommend, Ryan, has to meet 5 different criteria. Okay? It has to be best of class. It has to do a great job. It has to be cloud-based, so I can reach it from all of my devices. It has to be completely cross-platform. I used to work for Apple, but I'm no longer a Mac bigot. I want people to be able to do this from iOS, Android, Mac, Windows, Ubuntu. I don't care. I want everyone to be able to play. So it has to be completely cross-platform. The tool has to be robust. It has to meet that criteria of never use 2 tools where one will do. And then the last thing is that the tool should be freemium. It should be free to try, but the tools that I rely on, I want to pay for because I want to support the developers, and I also want to be able to rely on that tool in the future. So while free tools are great, I want to pay for the tools that I rely on so that I know, unlike Google Reader, it's going to be there in the future when I need it.
Right.
So getting back to, collecting, at the very basic level, there's a great tool that I use called Rebel Mouse. And I don't make up these names. I just find these tools. I always feel, kind of funny about recommending Rebel Mouse. But what it does is it collects content from up to 25 different streams and puts it into a nice web page along with the picture. So, for example, you can put your Twitter account in there, and it will automatically aggregate everything that you tweet and put it in one place. And you can take it a step further, and you can embed a Rebel Mouse page on your website. They make it drop-dead simple to use and to leverage. And so that's one of my favorite tools. I have a Rebel Mouse page at rebelmouse.com/Todd Lohenry that anyone could go to and take a look at. And then on my website, under recommended reading, the content that's there is the content that comes from a Rebel Mouse page.
Yeah, the menu item is specifically what I read.
What I read. Okay.
Right.
So, you don't have to, launch a self-hosted WordPress website in order to start collecting your content. And in fact, if you use a simple tool like Rebel Mouse, later on when you make that step and you go to a full-blown self-hosted WordPress website, you can leverage that content as part of your website later on.
Okay. All right, so moving on from collect, as we get into the last 4 items of the 9-step elevation workflow, what is connect?
Well, connect is, like once you have, done all this work, you've decided, who you are and how you want to represent yourself out on the internet, then I think it's time where you go out and you start actively pursuing people and telling them, hey, I'm here, whatever your business is, whether you're looking to get hired or whether you're looking to, to get hired in, as a freelancer, get hired in, inside a company. I think that all other things being equal, the benefit goes to the person who has demonstrated that they have done the work, that they are actively educating themselves. They're in a continuous education process. They're finding and sharing great information. People are interacting with them. Once you have, created this, this home base, if you will, of all your collected content, that's the time when you go out and you start actively pursuing those public victories, looking for whatever opportunity was your purpose in the first place.
Okay. So as we begin to connect in that way, the next step is converse, which just seems like kind of a natural extension of, connecting with someone and then carrying that onto a longer, more detailed, if you will, conversation.
Right, and so in our case, I mean, the way that we connected is, is classic. I found your podcasts in Pocket Casts. And I'm always interested in personal branding and anything to do with building online reputation. So I listened to a couple of blog posts and said, I like what I'm hearing. And so then I followed you in Twitter, and then I asked you if you would follow me back so that we could have a conversation. Mm-hmm. And out of the, when I was on Twitter, I looked at your bio. And, you have something, in there about would you like to, to be interviewed, on a particular topic. And I said, hell yeah. And that's where the conversation started. So in that process, too, you took a look at my content online. I took a look at your content online. We decided that there was synergy and a reason to move on into a deeper engagement. Right. So it's kind of a classic example of how it works.
Yeah, and we're conversing over a topic that we're both pretty passionate about, online reputation. But you can use this same process. In fact, many of my guests on the previous shows have all recommended using the same or very similar process if you're looking for a new job, for example, as a part of the job search process. Right?
Absolutely.
Because if you're not contemplating, if I just go back through real quick, if you're not contemplating who you want to work for, what you want to do, and you're not reviewing those, say, companies or people within them to consume and curate and create content around it, you're not going to be able to ultimately collect and converse with the people within the company that you need to be able to get that internal referral and potentially the job that you want later.
And that's a great application of, of the workflow that I really had not thought about myself, but, as you say it makes perfect sense.
Right. And so as we move on, in the business side, convert means something different. To stick with our example just for a minute, convert in this case would be actually getting the job.
Well, yeah. I think, I have a very simple, definition of conversion. And, a conversion is really anything that you ask someone to do, as a result of visiting your site or a landing page or whatever. So a conversion could be as simple as please sign up for my newsletter, please download my, my free ebook. A conversion is anytime, in my mind that you ask someone to do something and they do it.
Okay. All right. So quick question on that. Can a pretty website help you convert, or is an unpretty one better?
I don't think a pretty website hurts. At the very least, and I do website development. I tend to make my websites very simple so that they load quickly, because this is a criteria of Google. They want your content to load, every page to load in 1.2 seconds or less, which is a difficult goal to accomplish. So, originally, as a web developer, my goal was that people would not roll around on the floor and claw their eyes out when they saw one of my websites, and then, move on from there.
Right.
I'm sure there are some statistics, and maybe you have some thoughts about that. I don't think that a pretty website necessarily will close the deal, but I don't think it will hurt.
Yeah. Yeah, I think more from everything that I've read and just what I've observed online, I think conversion is a lot more related to the very first step, which is that contemplation, understanding the keywords and your target audience. That will help you convert a lot more than having a nice, pretty website.
Yeah, I think, at the end of the day, when someone comes to your site to do a transaction, and a conversion is a form of a transaction, that basically you want to get the hell out of their way and make it as easy for them to do as possible.
Yep. And you said, what was it you said earlier? You need to make things as simple as possible, but not any simpler?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So, have your, a strong call to action, and make it very clear what you hope people will do as a result. And then just get out of their way.
Right. So after we convert people, we move into the last step of the elevation workflow process, which is creating community. And I'm pretty sure this is going to relate very closely to Dory again and her many-to-many philosophy. But what is the create community step?
Well, when you take a look at acquisition costs, or how much effort it takes to convert someone in the first place, and then how much easier it is to repeat the process once someone has had a good experience with you, then one of the things that you're going to want to do is either take the time to create a community, a private community in Facebook, in the form of a Facebook group, or in Google Plus, and find a way to give people to continually reinforce the value of working with you, and continue to demonstrate that you are a trusted source for great information around the topic that brought them in the first place. So, in a lot of ways, the goal of creating community is simply to facilitate the relationship and to encourage a continued business relationship or buying relationship with the trusted source. It's just a way of, you need to provide a mechanism, whether it's on your site or in a social media tool, to make it easy for people to connect with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and now that wraps up all 9 of the elevation workflow, and you have these kind of laid out as a flow into each other. I'm wondering at the end here, if we call it the end, and I'll put that in parentheses, at Create Community, I'm assuming that we will learn things from our community that we didn't know before, which will then kind of circle us back to Contemplate, where we may decide that it's time to look at different people in our niche or niche, depending upon how we say it, maybe where we're from in the country. but the whole cycle seems like it could repeat at that point again as you continue to refine your definition of the niche or niche that you're involved in.
Absolutely, and that's why I call it a lather, rinse, repeat process. This is something that, Ryan, if there's any elegance at all, in this, the workflow that I originally developed for myself and then started to share with other people, it's that if I want to continue to call myself an expert and have any hope of achieving thought leadership status, I have to continue to like outconsume the competition and my clients, I have to continue to stay on top of my craft by monitoring the sites, searches, sources, and someday maybe information that nourishes my expertise. I have to have a way to continue to deepen my expertise, but then the same workflow also allows me to quickly and easily document my expertise. And in a lot of ways, I have younger boys, and one of the things I'm working on with one of my sons right now is that it doesn't make any difference if you come up with the right answer. You have to document your work. You have to show people. You have to also show Google that you know what you know. And, the good thing about it is that every move that Google has made in terms of hyper-tuning the search engine is that Google is actively looking for the source, for original thinkers, for people who are taking the time to do this. And so, like I said, if there's any, elegance in this, is that I have to read it in order to stay on top of my craft. But if I let people know that I'm reading it and I'm synthesizing good thoughts for them, then I get the benefit of getting found in search as an original thinker.
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking, Todd, this is fantastic information. And as I kind of think back on our conversation here, we've stayed pretty high level at more of a strategic level. And what I'm wondering is, and I know because you've already touched on some of this, I'd like to get more into some of the tactics that are involved in each one of these steps. And what I'd like to know before we start to wrap up here is would you be willing to come back on and maybe next time we go through the 9 steps, we talk about the actual tools and the tactics that you use in each one of these steps to help your clients go from being thinkers to thought leaders?
Ryan, I would love to do that. So let's make a plan and make that happen.
Okay, great. I think that'd be fantastic because a lot of times, as you were doing with Seth's book, right? A lot of times strategy is great and it gets your mind going and you start to think, but it's the execution part where a lot of people start to fall down. And so I think there's just a natural follow-up conversation to this one today. We'll talk strategy, and then I think we'll bring you back and we'll talk about specific tactics as well.
Great, and for that I'll have a second mind map, and usually the place where I start with most of my clients is with an inventory of all the things that you can possibly do, and then cross off all the things that don't make sense.
Okay.
And so the net result is a very small, manageable toolkit for what I call practical, tactical internet marketing that allows people to start where they're at and add new tools as they're ready.
Okay, awesome. I'm already looking forward to our discussion.
Likewise.
So, so as we wrap up here, what is the best way for listeners to get in touch with you if they want to learn more about the elevation workflow? I also know that you have an ebook. So, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Yeah, well, just for you, Ryan, I created a special landing page for the listeners to the podcast. And they can find it at toddlohenry.com/start.
Thank you.
And that's the place where they can begin.
Okay. And I assume there they'll find your Twitter handle and email and all that stuff, correct?
Yeah, well, when I'm teaching classes, I usually say, to people, I thank God every day that my mom did 2 things. First of all, she forced me to take touch typing in high school. And secondly, she made me the only Todd Lohenry in the world, and so I never have a problem getting a username. Nice.
That's nice. I thought I was in that same boat until about 2.5, maybe 3 years ago now when I decided to find out what my online reputation was like, and I found out that there are 3 other Ryan Rotens out there, so who knew?
Wow.
Yeah, surprising. So, Todd, as we wrap up today, and again, as we wrap up our strategy discussion on the elevation workflow, do you have any final thoughts, words of wisdom, or tips that you'd like to pass on to anybody who's listening today as it comes to either the elevation workflow itself or just online reputation management in general?
Going back to the idea of simplicity. And, Einstein's razor, another one of my, my favorite quotes comes from Da Vinci, who said that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. In order to get found, you don't have to master 17 different social networks, launch a complex, WordPress website, all these different things at the same time. It's possible to start simple and to stay simple, and the focus should be on, understanding who you are and beginning with the end in mind, what kind of online reputation that you hope to create. And if you just keep it simple, I think you stand a much better chance of getting found than if you try to master all, the different things that, that people are saying, work today.
Right. Right. And getting found is becoming more and more critical as, the internet age, if you will, continues to evolve and more people take to the online space in order to either advance or enhance their careers.
Right. And, one other thing that, that I haven't mentioned, but, that I usually, point out when I'm meeting with someone online, I just turned 57 on Wednesday. And I've been in business development for over 30 years. I don't do this because it's cool. I do this because it works. And there is such a massive difference in cold calling and having someone contact you because they found you and you gained instant credibility because you showed up in the top of a search engine ranking page. Now, when you show up in the top of search, there's an instant credibility that is impugned to you that it's hard to get any other way.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, hey Todd, I could probably sit here and talk to you all day long, but I'm probably breaking one of my rules with this podcast anyway by going over my 45-minute mark. But what we're talking about is so important and it's so critical to, whether it's for your career or something else, people need to know this information. So I really appreciate you taking the time today to talk to me and the listeners, and I am really looking forward to having you back on so we can talk specific tactics so that people can start doing this stuff because it's that important.
Sounds great, Ryan. Thank you.
Okay, cool.
All right.
We'll wrap there. Thank you. I appreciate it. I know we